Millionaire's son appeared deformed at the wedding, until the black cleaner discovered the bride's secret. The scream that cut through the flower garden of the Blackwood mansion made even the violinists stop playing. At the altar decorated with white roses, the bride Victoria froze, her perfect smile falling from her face like a broken mask. Among the elegant guests, a young man in his 20s staggered toward the ceremony. His face was completely disfigured. Deep scars cut across his skin from forehead to chin, one of his eye sockets was sunken, and he limped heavily, dragging his left leg. The expensive suit could not hide his extreme thinness or the tremors that shook his frail body. "Michael," whispered Robert Blackwood, the millionaire owner of one of the largest construction companies in the United States. "My son, what happened to you?" Victoria took 3 steps back, as if the young man were carrying some contagious disease. His mother, sitting in the front row, put her hand to her mouth and muttered something like, "This can't be happening." Lila Washington, the 45-year-old cleaning lady who had been working at the mansion for 8 months, watched everything from the back of the garden. Her heart raced, not only from the shock of the appearance, but because she finally understood why Victoria had lied so much in recent months. Everyone believed that Michael was studying medicine in Europe. Victoria constantly repeated this version to employees, friends, anyone who asked about her stepson. But Lila had noticed strange things. Medical letters hidden in the office trash can. Whispered phone conversations about special treatments and discreet places. Nighttime visits from people dressed as nurses. Even more disturbing were the powerful medications Victoria kept locked in the master bathroom. Medications for extreme pain, heavy sedatives, drugs that Lila recognized from the days when she cared for her terminally ill grandmother in the hospice. "Victoria," Michael managed to articulate, his voice weak and raspy. Why did you do this to me?" The entire garden fell silent. Even the children stopped running between the tables. Victoria stared at the young man as if he were a ghost returning from the grave to haunt her. Robert took a step toward his son, but Michael raised a trembling hand, as if trying to protect himself. "No," he whispered. She said you didn't want to see me anymore. That I was a burden." Lila squeezed her apron between her fingers. In recent months, whenever she asked about Michael, Victoria quickly changed the subject. When she asked about recent photos or phone calls, the answer was always the same: he's very busy with his studies, he prefers not to be disturbed. But now, seeing that young man physically and emotionally destroyed, Lila realized she had witnessed much more than she had imagined. It wasn't just lies about an absent son. It was something much more sinister, something that breathed in the shadows of the mansion, hidden behind Victoria's calculated smiles. As the guests whispered in shock and Robert tried to approach his son, Lila watched the look of utter panic on the bride's face. It was no surprise. It was terror. The terror of someone whose darkest secrets had just been exposed in front of 200 witnesses. And if your heart is racing with this revelation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Michael was about to reveal about the last 2 years of his life would turn that dream wedding into the biggest nightmare Victoria could ever imagine. What followed was controlled chaos. Victoria finally reacted, not with compassion, but with cold anger. "Michael, you should be resting. This is no place for you." Her voice carried an icy authority that made several guests look at each other uncomfortably. "Resting where?" Michael managed to articulate, leaning on one of the decorated chairs. "In that clinic you locked me up in? Where the nurses drugged me every day because you said I was dangerous." Victoria's mother, Patricia Kellerman, quickly rose from the front row, walking toward the young man with determined steps. "Michael, dear, you're confused by the medication. Let's go back to your room." "My room?" Michael's voice rose an octave. "You mean that windowless cell? Where you kept me for 2 years, saying my father didn't want to see me anymore." Lila watched every word, every gesture, every expression. Over the past 8 months, she had realized that Victoria controlled all information about Michael. When Robert asked about his son, Victoria always had an excuse ready. "He called yesterday, he's focused on his studies." The teachers praised his progress. He asked not to be disturbed during his final exams. But Lila had found strange things. Heavy medications hidden in Victoria's bathroom, sedatives, antipsychotics, drugs she recognized from her time caring for her grandmother with severe dementia. Suspicious phone calls Victoria made locked in her office, always mentioning administering the correct dose, and keeping him quiet until we figure this out." Robert was in shock, looking at the son he hadn't seen in 2 years. Michael, who before the exchange was a healthy 18-year-old, now looked like he was 40. The deep scars on his face were not from an accident. They were marks of medical negligence, of injuries not treated properly. "Michael," Robert approached slowly, "my son, I don't understand. Victoria told me you were at Oxford University, studying medicine, that it was your dream." Michael let out a bitter laugh that cut through the heart of anyone who heard it. "Oxford? Dad, for the past 2 years I've been confined to a private psychiatric clinic. Victoria put me there after convincing you that I had violent outbursts." The entire garden froze. Victoria stepped forward, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Robert, you know how Michael can be when he doesn't take his medication. He's delusional again. That's why we need to keep him in specialized treatment." But Lila saw something no one else noticed. Victoria kept looking toward the side exit of the garden, as if she were waiting for someone. Her right hand was trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from something much more sinister. "Treatment." Michael managed to laugh again, but it was the sound of something broken. "You call drugging me until I can't speak treatment? Tying me to the bed when I tried to ask about my father? Telling me every day that no one loved me, that I was a burden you needed to hide?" Patricia tried again to approach him. "Michael, you're very upset. Let's call Dr. Stevens to adjust your medication." "Dr. Stevens?" Robert finally found his voice. "Who is Dr. Stevens?" "Victoria, you told me Michael was being monitored by the university medical team." That's when Lila noticed the pattern. Over the past few months, Victoria had been receiving visits from men in white coats whom she always introduced as financial advisors or wedding planners. But they carried medical bags. And they always left through the back of the house, never through the front door. Victoria was cornered, and her mask was beginning to crack. "Robert, you have to trust me. Michael had a serious psychotic episode after you announced our engagement. He threatened to hurt himself, threatened other people. It was for everyone's safety that we had him committed." "Liar." Michael's voice echoed through the garden. "I just questioned why she was changing my father's will. Why she was pressuring you to cut me out of the inheritance." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked at Victoria as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Will? Victoria, we never discussed the will." Victoria tried to smile, but it was the smile of someone who knows they are losing the game. "Honey, you were so stressed out with work. I just suggested that it would be better for Michael to have a responsible guardian to manage his assets until he fully recovered." "Responsible guardian," Michael repeated, each word laden with pain. "She wanted you to appoint her as administrator of everything I would inherit. When I found out and confronted you about it, she convinced me that I was having paranoid hallucinations." Lila watched everything while she organized the pieces of the puzzle in her mind. Victoria wasn't just a gold-digging fiancée, she was a calculating predator who had systematically isolated and destroyed an innocent young man to gain access to the Blackwood family fortune. Patricia took Victoria by the arm, whispering something urgent in her ear. But Lila managed to hear part of the conversation. "We should have increased the dose. He can't be here." Dr. Stevens said that was impossible. The most disturbing thing was seeing how Victoria was still trying to manipulate the situation. While Michael was clearly traumatized and could barely stand, she continued to act as if she were the victim. "Robert, I did everything out of love for our family. Michael needs professional help, and I was just trying to protect him and protect you." But Robert now looked at the scars on his son's face, at his extreme thinness, at his constant tremors. "Michael, how did you get out of where you were? How did you get here?" Michael leaned heavily on the chair, clearly exhausted by the effort of being there. "A nurse. She took pity on me. She helped me find out where you really were. She gave me money for the taxi." Victoria took a step toward the young man, but now her expression had changed completely. It was no longer the concerned fiancé, it was something much colder. "Michael, you're making a very serious mistake by showing up here like this. There are consequences for your actions." And it was with that direct threat, delivered in front of 200 guests, that Lila realized something terrible. Victoria wasn't just hiding Michael. She was willing to do anything to keep her secrets buried. As the guests murmured in shock and Robert tried to process the devastating reality about his fiancée and his son, Lila felt a fierce determination growing inside her. This woman had tortured a child, had almost destroyed a family, and still had the audacity to threaten the victim in front of everyone. What Victoria didn't know was that Lila Washington wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a woman who had survived worse things and knew exactly how people like Victoria operated. More importantly, she had saved every piece of suspicious evidence she had collected over the past few months, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment had arrived. And Victoria was about to discover that underestimating the black woman who cleaned her house had been the biggest mistake of her privileged life. While Victoria desperately tried to control the damage in front of her shocked guests, Lila watched her bride's every move with the precision of someone who had spent months collecting fragments of a much bigger truth. What Victoria didn't know was that the cleaning lady had kept every piece of suspicious evidence she had found. "Robert, you have to trust me," Victoria insisted, trying to pull her husband away from Michael. "Our marriage can't be ruined by a psychotic episode. Dr. Stevens warned me that this could happen if Michael stopped taking his medication." Patricia quickly approached, whispering something in her daughter's ear. Lila managed to catch part of the conversation. "Call Stevens now. Emergency sedative. We can't let him talk anymore." It was then that Lila realized they had a plan B. It wasn't just about hiding Michael, they were prepared to drug him again, right there in front of everyone, disguising it as medical care. Discreetly, Lila moved away from the group and walked toward the car where she kept her bag. Over the past 8 months, every time she cleaned Victoria's office, she photographed strange documents before putting them back in their place. She also had recordings of phone conversations she had accidentally captured while cleaning near the locked office. But her most powerful evidence was stored in an envelope inside her purse, a copy of Michael's real medical report, which he had found in Victoria's bathroom trash 3 months ago. The original document showed that Michael had no psychiatric disorder. He was completely mentally healthy. Victoria had forged a second report to justify his hospitalization. "Lila." The harsh voice made her turn around. It was James Morrison, the Blackwood family's private driver for 15 years. He approached quickly, looking concerned. "Did you see what's going on over there?" "I saw everything, Mr. Morrison," Lila replied, noticing that the man seemed genuinely disturbed. "I knew something was wrong," James whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Victoria has had me drive her to that sinister clinic several times over the past 2 years. It's a horrible place, with no sign, nothing. She always said it was for routine visits, but Michael never got out of the car when we returned." Lila felt her heart race. "Do you have any proof of that?" James smiled bitterly. "I have something better. I have the car's GPS recording all the trips. And I also have the recordings from the internal audio system." He paused, looking in the direction where Victoria was still trying to convince Robert. "That woman is a demon, Lila. I heard her on the phone planning how to increase Michael's medication to make him more docile. I heard her laughing when she told her mother that Michael had tried to escape and was recaptured." The pieces of the puzzle fell into place in Lila's mind. Victoria wasn't just a manipulative opportunist. She was a sociopath who had systematically tortured an innocent young man. "Mr. Morrison, would you be willing to testify about this?" "I should have done that a long time ago," he replied, regret in his voice. "But I was afraid of losing my job. Robert is a good man, but Victoria, she has ways of destroying people who oppose her." Lila looked back at the scene in the garden. Victoria had managed to temporarily remove Robert from Michael, and Patricia was on the phone, probably calling Dr. Stevens. She also saw that some guests were beginning to openly question Victoria's explanations. "There's a journalist here," Lila murmured, watching an elegant woman who was discreetly filming everything with her cell phone. "Rachel Torres, from KCTV News. She's covering the wedding, but from the look on her face, I can tell there's a much bigger story here." James followed her gaze. "Rachel Torres? She did that series on corruption in private psychiatric clinics last year. If she finds out what Victoria did..." That's when Lila had a brilliant idea. "Mr. Morrison, can you do me a favor? Can you go talk to the reporter? Tell her what you know, show her the evidence you have. Meanwhile, I'm going to do something I should have done months ago." "What are you going to do?" Lila opened her purse and took out the envelope with Michael's original medical report. I'm going to show Robert who he was really about to marry. While James discreetly approached the reporter, Lila watched Victoria trying to convince the guests that Michael was having a severe psychotic episode and needed to be restrained for his own safety. Several guests seemed to accept this explanation, especially the older ones, who clearly preferred to believe the bride's elegant version rather than confront the brutal reality. But Lila noticed that some of the younger guests were restless. One of Victoria's bridesmaids whispered to another, "Don't you think it's strange that she never showed any recent photos of Michael?" And one of Robert's groomsmen commented, 2 years without seeing his own son? That's not normal. Victoria sensed the change in the guests' mood and intensified her performance. "Robert, my love, you have to understand that I did all this to protect our family. Michael can be dangerous when he's not on his medication. That's why Dr. Stevens recommended specialized treatment." "Dr. Stevens," Robert repeated slowly. "Victoria, I want to talk to this doctor. Now." Patricia quickly intervened. "Dr. Stevens is on his way, dear. He'll bring the medication needed to stabilize Michael." That's when Lila realized she had little time. If this doctor arrived, if there really was a doctor, they would drug Michael again and the truth would be buried once more. She needed to act immediately. Taking a deep breath, Lila approached the main group, gently interrupting their conversation. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood. Can I have a word with you?" Victoria turned to her with obvious irritation. "Lila, now is not the time. Go back to your duties." But Robert, who had always treated Lila with respect, motioned for her to come closer. "What is it, Lila?" Lila handed the envelope to Robert, completely ignoring Victoria's angry stare. "Mr. Blackwood, I think you should see this. I found this document in the trash 3 months ago. It's Michael's original medical report." Victoria tried to snatch the paper from Robert's hand, but he had already begun to read it. His expression gradually changed from confusion to utter horror. "Mental state, completely normal," Robert read aloud. "Shows no signs of psychiatric disorders. Patient lucid, oriented, and emotionally stable." He looked up at Victoria, who was as pale as a sheet. "Victoria, this says there's nothing wrong with Michael." "Robert, this document is fake," Victoria stammered. "Someone is trying to sabotage our marriage." But Lila wasn't finished. "Mr. Morrison," she called, and the driver approached with Rachel Torres at his side. "Tell Mr. Blackwood about the trips to the clinic." James took a deep breath. "Mr. Blackwood, over the past 2 years, I drove Victoria to an underground clinic 47 times. It wasn't a real hospital, it was a warehouse for people others wanted to hide. And I have recordings of Victoria planning how to keep Michael sedated." Rachel Torres approached with a microphone. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Rachel Torres from KCTV News. With your permission, I'd like to document this situation. If what I'm hearing is true, it could expose an illegal forced hospitalization scheme." Victoria panicked completely. "Robert, don't listen to these people. They're being paid by someone to destroy our happiness." But Robert wasn't listening anymore. He looked at Michael, who was leaning on a chair, clearly exhausted but mentally present, and then at the medical report in his hands. The truth was crystallizing in his mind like a devastating revelation. "Victoria," his voice was low, but it carried a restrained anger that made several guests recoil. You tortured my son. You drugged him, locked him up, made him believe I didn't love him anymore. I did it all for us." Victoria shouted, completely losing her composure. "He was an obstacle. You would never have married me if you had to take care of a troubled boy." The ensuing silence was broken only by the sound of the recording James began playing on his phone. Victoria's voice echoed through the garden. "Increase his dose 1 more time. I want him to remain in a vegetative state for another 6 months. Until Robert forgets he exists." It was then that Robert did something no one expected. He turned to Lila, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude and remorse. "Lila, how can I thank you for saving my son?" Lila smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Blackwood. You just have to take good care of Michael from now on." Victoria, realizing she had completely lost control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. "You'll regret this. I have powerful friends. I can destroy you all." But her threats rang hollow. Rachel Torres had captured everything on video. The guests now looked at her with horror and disgust. And Robert. Robert looked at her as if she were a monster he had never really known. As she watched Victoria crumble publicly, Lila felt a quiet satisfaction growing in her chest. For months, she had been just the invisible cleaning lady, underestimated and ignored. Victoria never imagined that the black woman who cleaned her house was documenting every crime, collecting every piece of evidence, waiting patiently for the right moment to act. But what Victoria was about to discover was that Lila Washington was not just a cleaning lady. She was a woman who had survived the welfare system, who had raised 3 children on her own, who had studied law for 10 years in her spare time. More importantly, she was someone who knew exactly how the powerful tried to destroy the vulnerable, because she had spent her entire life being underestimated by people just like Victoria. When Patricia tried to intervene again, whispering to Victoria that they could still control the damage, it was Lila who responded, her voice calm and determined. "Ladies, you have made a very serious mistake. You tortured an innocent young man and thought no one was watching. But I was. And now the whole world will know exactly who you really are." Victoria's threat echoed through the garden like a gunshot, but it was Rachel Torres who responded, pointing the camera directly at her. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed a live confession. Victoria Kellerman has just threatened multiple people for exposing her crimes." Victoria tried to snatch the camera from the journalist's hands, but James stepped in, holding his phone high. And here is the complete recording of a conversation between Victoria and Dr. Stevens from the clandestine clinic. Her voice echoed through the garden via the loudspeaker. "I need Michael to remain sedated indefinitely. How much would it cost for him to never recover?" The guests' shock was palpable. Several people screamed, others began filming with their cell phones. Patricia tried to flee, but 2 of Robert's groomsmen held her by the arms. Lila approached Robert, holding out a folder she had kept in the car. "Mr. Blackwood, here is all the evidence I have collected over the past 8 months. Forged documents, proof of payment to the illegal clinic, tampered medical records, and," she paused dramatically, "the will that Victoria tried to get you to sign, where she would become Michael's legal guardian and administrator of his entire estate." Robert opened the folder with trembling hands. Among the documents was a copy of the will he didn't remember seeing, with his forged signature. "My signature. This isn't my signature. I hired a handwriting expert to confirm it," Lila continued calmly. "Victoria forged your signature on 23 different documents. She not only tortured your son, she planned to steal the entire family fortune." Victoria, completely out of control, shouted, "You don't understand. Michael was an obstacle. Robert would never have been happy taking care of that troubled boy. I saved this family." "Saved." Robert turned to her with a fury that made several guests recoil. "You tortured my son. You made him believe I didn't love him anymore. You destroyed 2 years of his life." Michael, leaning on a chair, managed to speak in a weak but determined voice. "Dad, she said you were planning to have me committed permanently because I was a burden. She made me believe you hated who I was." That's when the sirens arrived. 3 police cars and an ambulance entered through the mansion's main gate. Rachel Torres had called the authorities during the chaos, and now the officers were walking quickly toward the group. "Detective Morgan," Rachel addressed the tallest police officer, "I have evidence of kidnapping, document forgery, forced administration of medication, and attempted financial fraud." Victoria tried one last desperate gambit. "Officers, these people are slandering me. I am a respected businesswoman, engaged to Robert Blackwood. This young man has serious mental problems, and these people are being manipulated." But her speech was interrupted when Lila handed the detective a final recording. Victoria's voice echoed clearly, "Dr. Stevens, what would be the price for an accident? Something that looks natural? Michael needs to disappear permanently." The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia collapsed in tears, realizing there was no escaping the evidence. Victoria looked around like a cornered animal, seeing all the faces that once admired her now filled with revulsion and horror. "Victoria Kellerman and Patricia Kellerman," Detective Morgan announced, "you are under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, document forgery, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the handcuffs were being put on, Victoria tried once again to manipulate the situation. "Robert, you know you love me. Don't let them destroy our future because of this boy." But Robert didn't respond. He was kneeling beside Michael, hugging the son he had almost lost forever. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I should have realized. I should have protected you." Lila watched the scene with silent satisfaction. For 8 months, she had been invisible, underestimated, ignored. Victoria never imagined that the black woman who cleaned her house was documenting every crime, collecting every piece of evidence, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to act. "How did you manage all this?" Rachel asked, impressed by Lila's organization. "I learned that people like Victoria always feel safe when they think no one important is watching," Lila replied calmly. "They forget that invisibility can be a powerful weapon." As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, shouting incoherent accusations, the guests watched in utter shock. Many had come for an elegant wedding and were witnessing the exposure of one of the greatest frauds they had ever seen. James approached Lila. "You saved that boy." Victoria was planning something much worse than institutionalization. "I know," Lila murmured, watching Michael receive medical attention from the paramedics. "I found emails from her researching fatal accidents in psychiatric clinics." She didn't just want the inheritance, she wanted to make sure Michael could never contest anything. What was most impressive was how Lila had orchestrated everything perfectly. She hadn't acted on impulse or anger, she had waited, gathered irrefutable evidence, and involved the right people at the right time. She had turned a wedding into a public courtroom where justice had finally prevailed. Robert approached her, his eyes still filled with tears. "Lila, how can I thank you? You saved my son. You saved my family." "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Blackwood," she replied with dignity. "Just take good care of Michael. And remember, sometimes the most important people are the ones you don't notice." As the ambulance took Michael away for proper medical care and the police cars drove off with Victoria and Patricia, the garden slowly emptied. What should have been a celebration of love had become a powerful demonstration that true justice sometimes needs a little help from people brave enough to act when everyone else prefers to ignore. 6 months later, Lila Washington walked across the Columbia University campus, where she had been invited as the keynote speaker for the social justice program. Rachel Torres's report had gone viral, exposing not only the Blackwood case, but an entire network of clandestine clinics that Victoria and Patricia had been operating for years. Lila Washington, the invisible heroine who saved a life, was the headline in the New York Times. Her testimony had led to the arrest of 12 people involved in the scheme, including the fake Dr. Stevens, who was actually a nurse who had been expelled from the profession. Victoria received 25 years in prison for kidnapping, attempted murder, and fraud. Patricia received 18 years. During the trial, Victoria once again attempted to manipulate the jury, claiming that people like Lila did not understand the sacrifices necessary to maintain successful families. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. Michael was unrecognizable, in the best sense. He had gained weight, his scars were healing with proper treatment, and he had returned to studying medicine, his original dream. "Lila gave me back not only my freedom, but my dignity," he said in his emotional testimony. Robert turned his gratitude into action. He created a foundation against institutional abuse, appointing Lila as executive director. "For 8 months, the most important person in my house was the one I noticed the least," he admitted publicly. James Morrison was promoted to head of security, responsible for investigating suspicious employees. Rachel Torres won a Pulitzer for the series of reports that followed. "For years I was invisible," Lila told the audience of 500 law students. But invisibility can be a superpower when used by those who have the courage to act for justice. She paused, looking at the cameras. "Victoria Kellerman thought I was just an unimportant black cleaning lady. But she forgot that unimportant people are the ones who observe the most, listen the most, and understand the most how real power works." The audience rose to their feet in ovation. In online comments, thousands shared their own stories of being underestimated and finding strength in adversity. Victoria, in her cell in federal prison, watched the speech on television. Her hands trembled, not with anger, but with a belated and terrible realization that she had chosen exactly the wrong person as her enemy. "True revenge," Lila concluded, "is not destroying those who have hurt you. It's to build something so powerful that they realize how wrong they were about who you really are." Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were superior? Leave your story of overcoming adversity in the comments. If this journey touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that justice always finds a way, especially through those whom the world tries to make invisible.